Thank you very much, Bruce, and thank you very much to all of you for having me. Before I tell you about the science, and I apologize, I recently interviewed for the Watson School and was ridiculed because I said the students' real problems, and I've brought some real problems for you tonight as well, so I want you to think with me, and I'm looking forward to your questions. I've already had some very interesting discussions leading up to my presentation tonight when you all arrived. I want to say why an evening like this is very special, though, from my perspective. It gives us a chance to reflect on what makes Cold Spring Harbor a very unique place. And I want to highlight three things. One is a reiteration of what Bruce has said. It's a place where we get to ask questions that we can't ask in other places. Really problems that are so far at the cutting edge that funding agencies might shy away from funding them because they come with a risk when we ask those questions, but those are the questions that we should be asking to truly advance science. So I was really excited when I had the chance to come to Cold Spring Harbor because, of course, the history and the reputation of the laboratory precedes it, and I'm hoping to do it justice from that perspective. The second thing is it's a uniquely interactive place where everybody is kind to each other and every scientist tries to advance his friends' and neighbors' thinking. And that's also not a given, and those of you who haven't been in science may not know that, but science can be ruthless as well and competitive. And at Cold Spring Harbor, there is this atmosphere of relaxed, intense unity in thinking about science and how to advance it. And that's a great attraction to young scientists across the globe, and also was one of the main reasons why I decided to come. The third, and I think most important reason for the event tonight is that Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory has a very intimate and reciprocal relationship with the community that surrounds it. Again, a very unique point, I would say an absolute rarity amongst research institutions, and I should really thank you very deeply on behalf of all the scientists who work here at the lab. It doesn't escape us. We are very grateful that you all help us to ask the questions that matter. And as I said, we want to make it a reciprocal relationship. So I'm looking forward to your questions tonight, and I think we all have an open door policy. If any of you feel that you want to have a deeper discussion about the science, please send us an email. Come speak to us for an hour. I've already had some discussions with one of the trustees, and I will tell you in a minute why I think that is useful for us as well. But before I tell you about the science that I want to do while I'm here, I want to tell you a little bit where I've come from, because Bruce mentioned that I've recently arrived, and I was at the University of Cambridge, and I think this transition from Cambridge to here was a natural step as Cold Spring Harbor was building the institute that looks at the entire body and not just at the tumor. And that's what I want to do as I rethink cancer medicine. So I've come from Cambridge not alone. I've brought my family. This is my lovely wife, Clary, who sits in the audience and whom I want to thank for having taken the leap of faith with me. I have never had a chance to do that in public yet. I'm really grateful. It wasn't an easy decision, as you can imagine, because as you can see, we've got three little ones there, Viola, Arthur, whom we call Wolfie, his middle name is Wolf, and Albert. And they have their grandparents in Europe and close to Cambridge, and of course it was a decision that we had to carefully weigh up. We've come from a place called Gonville and Keys College. This is a picture from our wedding that we had at that college 7 years ago now. And that is a place that has a long tradition of combining seemingly unrelated areas of thinking. This is the crest of the college. On the left-hand side, you see the signs or the crest of a pilgrim, Gonville, who first funded it. On the right, you see the crest of a medic who refunded it in the 16th century, John Keys. So essentially, the college brings together different ways of thinking, and that is also true when it comes to medicine and how we think about medicine. One of the famous alumni from the college is Francis Crick, who doesn't need an introduction to you, who thought about the molecular biology, but centuries before, the college was home to William Harvey, who looked at the physiology of the body and was the first person to postulate that blood was a circulating substance in the body that would bring various nutrients and various signaling molecules across the body to allow communication between different organ systems. And I'm actually going to build on that discovery with my science in a way, because I want to tell you tonight about how substances that arise in the tumor migrate into the body and start reprogramming the body in various ways that affect the tumor growth and the responsiveness to anti-cancer therapy in its own right. And by reverse logic, I propose that we therefore have to think about reprogramming those phenomena whilst we think about pushing back against the cancer. So essentially what I'm saying is, I think we think about cancer too frequently as a tumor-centric problem. Everybody's trying to fight the tumor, fight their specific cancer. But if I may use the example of pancreatic cancer that we are focusing a critical mass around here at Cold Spring Harbor, with that tumor-centric approach, we are making very modest inroads. There are some inroads, but actually most patients who are treated with a tumor-centric approach don't respond to treatment. The cure rate is low for pancreatic cancer, and systemic therapies like immunotherapy, when they are given in isolation and without careful reflection, are often ineffective. And I propose that's because we are not looking at the patient and the system of the patient and all the organ systems, and we are not looking, even though there are obvious signs that we should be looking. So if any of you ever had a friend or relative with cancer, you will know that they get unwell when they have cancer and that they get systemically unwell. They lose weight, they lose appetite, they lose energy, and all the signs are that their body isn't doing well because they have the tumor. And we know that for a long time. The syndrome Cachexia that I am in part studying, which is defined by loss of muscle mass, loss of substance of the body, and loss of appetite in a paradoxical manner, was defined by the Greek. Kakos hexos means bad state. So they knew it then, but we are just catching on to making inroads now and understanding what's going on. And I think the same is true in the reverse engineering that Bruce was referring to, that we also want to look at, is how does abnormal nutrition, when we engage in it, that drives obesity, then cause cancer? That's just the reverse engineering of the question. So I propose that we get good ideas about our research, not by just talking to scientists, but also by talking to patients. And I've put here 2 questions. I have to admit that they may not have been asked like this verbatim, but they have certainly been asked in kind hundreds of times in my clinic. And those are unanswered questions. The first one is the question, why am I not hungry when I'm losing so much weight? It doesn't make sense to me. And the relatives come and say, it doesn't make sense to us. We're giving him their favorite food. They don't eat it. They wither away in front of us, and we have no way to push back against it. What is going on? And the fact is that paradox is unresolved. No scientist knows the answer to it. And we have now, I think, a good method of combining preclinical and clinical work to get to the bottom of that. And that's one of the things that I want to do while I'm here at Cambridge, at Cold Spring Harbor, sorry. That I started in Cambridge and that I want to finish here, is to get to the bottom of this question of what drives this paradoxical phenomenon. The other question is, why can't doctors tell me with more certainty which therapy is most likely to help against my cancer? Or the reverse question is, why have I had this treatment and it didn't work? Couldn't you have foreseen this? And again, I propose that the answer to those questions can be found by not only looking at the tumor, but also looking at the body, which we do very badly in clinical practice at the moment. Most diagnostic workup, when we make decisions for cancer treatment, are driven by analysis of tumor tissue. And very, very little is decided based on analysis of the body that harbors the tumor. Now, there are various systems that interact within the body, and I can already see why Karen warned me not to put data into the presentation, because I'm 10 minutes in and haven't even started with the real science. But what I've sort of simplified this very much. There are various systems that interact within the body that I'm sure you are aware. The brain drives some of the activity that we have in our body. There is a hormone system, which is essentially a circulating system of small signaling molecules. You will have heard of insulin and hormones like that. There is an immune system that patrols the body all the time and looks for foreign invasion and also controls tumors. There is a metabolic system. The main organ that drives that is the liver, but it's not the unique organ. There's, of course, fat and muscle tissue and the digestive system that drives it. And one of my colleagues, Samir Bayas, who's in the audience, is studying that aspect. How does the digestive system and the nutrient supply to the digestive system drive tumorigenesis in the context of obesity? And then there is, of course, the tumor as part of it. And so I think we have to find connections between these systems and to understand the cause and effect relationship between these. And I'm showing here a schematic between the tumor, the main metabolic system, the hormone system, and the immune system, and how that has repercussions to the tumor. And I've chosen this schematic because that's founded on good research that we've already done, and that we've done in the preclinical setting, and that we are now hoping to move into the clinical setting through the collaboration with Northwell, where we are building a trial to try and reprogram this interaction in a way that we can push back against the cancer better. And I will tell you about that in a bit more detail over the next couple of slides. So the first interaction that I want to focus on is this interaction between the tumor and the metabolic system. And I've told you that the tumors can make substances that can then flow through the body, get to target tissues, and reprogram those tissues or have an effect on it in a hormone-like manner as a signaling molecule in the tradition of William Harvey, that the blood sort of circulates everywhere. And here I'm showing you some data that I want to explain to you carefully. I've plotted some weight data here from patients from my clinic. On the left-hand side, on the first graph here, you can see the percentage of the body weight. So somebody who would be weight stable would stay at 100%, and here it's time. It's time from the sampling retrospectively. So the patients here in black, they haven't lost weight over the 6 months prior to us taking the sample, whereas the patients in red have. And we now analyze, we can take those samples, and we could acquire those at Northwell Health, for example, and analyze the circulating molecules. And we can do that in a sort of broad sense or in a targeted manner. I'm showing you one molecule here that is related to inflammation, but the detail almost doesn't matter. And we find that this molecule is elevated in the patients, and we find that it actually causes a very peculiar phenomenon. As these patients lose weight, they failed to switch on their response program to the weight loss. So if you and I were to not eat for a while, our body would start making rescue nutrients from fat substance, from the muscle, and you will have heard of these. They are called ketones, and they would be elevated in our body. In these cancer patients that have this signaling molecule that retargets the liver and reprograms it, this response is not measurable. So in other words, they fail to respond appropriately in a way that is paradoxical, and that causes a massive stress to the body. So when we then measured the hormonal response to this abnormal metabolism, we found that the hormone system goes into alarm mode, essentially, and signals into the entire body this metabolism is not correct, and lifts the stress hormones across the body to very high levels. Stress hormones are problematic hormones. They do, on one end, help the body to respond to certain situations, but they actually press against the immune system. And we know that because we use types of stress hormones. You will have heard of cortisol maybe, or its derivatives, prednisolone, in clinical practice. We use it to push back against abnormal immune phenomena. For example, when people have autoimmunity, or when they get an organ transplantation, for example, and we want to make sure that the body tolerates the organ, which would otherwise be rejected by the immune system, we give patients stress hormones. So we were very concerned when we found that, and we asked ourselves, could that be the reason why patients who are systemically unwell fail to respond to those treatments that we use to stimulate the immune system, immunotherapies that you will have heard about. I won't go into the details of how immunotherapies work, but I want to show you an experiment that we did to test this. And here are the data from that experiment. So we used a mouse model system of cancer, and within that mouse model system, we gave immunotherapy once in the absence of stress hormones and once in the presence of stress hormones. And here I'm showing you the results to understand that experiment. This is the change of the cancer as we administer the treatment over time. This is in the presence of immunotherapy, the cancer doesn't grow. In the presence of control treatment, it does grow. That's ineffective control where the immunotherapy components are missing. Now we do the same treatment in the context of the stress hormones, and we find that the tumor always grows. In other words, the elevation of the hormones that push back against the immune system that we see in the abnormal metabolic setting in cancer are enough to break cancer immunotherapy. That means that we probably have to first reprogram the host and make sure that the metabolism normalizes and the stress level normalize before we can give patients immunotherapy in the hope that it might even work. And that's what we are working on in the preclinical and clinical setting. Now, the other thing that is always important, and where I think this collaboration that Cold Spring Harbor is now bringing with the clinical setting is really useful, is we can do very careful experiments in the lab, but the ultimate proof of the pudding, so to say, is in the clinic. And can we really translate the important science into something that gives benefit to the patient? And we can do that in both directions. We can ask ourselves, can we develop new treatments that help patients? But also, we can ask ourselves, do we already have evidence that our thinking might be relevant in our current clinical practice? And I think that's a very important way of scholarly thought to communicate back into the clinical community. You may have been to hospitals. You find that doctors are often very busy. They don't get time to think around their clinical practice because they're so intensely focused at the task at hand. And I think, again, sort of bringing the critical mass of thinking from Cold Spring Harbor into the clinical context will help people to make discoveries that are already sitting there and are waiting to come onto the scene, but people haven't really actually committed yet to looking into the data and looking into the clinical observations sufficiently to make those discoveries. And I'm showing you one set of data here which was really interesting for us when it came out. People caught on to our idea and went back into their experience of immunotherapy in patients that are being treated at Memorial Sloan Kettering down the road, actually, and said, well, if what they propose is true, then we should see a survival difference based on whether or not patients get, together with immunotherapy, immune modulatory drugs like prednisolone, so steroids, or don't. And when they did that study, they found the following results. Here's the survival curve. Here I plot the percentage of patients that are alive over time. Here I plot how long they've been alive for. And in red, the line are those patients who have been given immunotherapy with immune suppressive treatment. of these steroid drugs, and in black is the line of those who haven't been given immunotherapy in conjunction with high levels of this immune modulatory treatment. So that gives us the first indication that we are on the right track, and we're persevering with this. And essentially what I want to do as I move the research forward is to sort of take this observation that as the tumor progresses, it can push back more and more against the metabolism in the body. That can cause more and more stress. That suppresses the immune response more and more, and that can become a vicious cycle where the tumor essentially creates an environment where it can grow more and more readily and where treatment is more and more likely to fail. And I'm proposing to reverse that by pushing back against this, by giving the right nutrition, a nutrition that the body can process so that we lower the hormonal stress and thereby enable the immune system, and thereby can, with an enabled immune system, push back against the tumor better and have better chances of treating cancer. And the same thing is, it can be done, of course, not only through nutrition, but through very specific drug treatment that treats the immune system to make it more active and rectifies the problems that we identify in the entire body whilst pushing back against the cancer. And so those combination studies we are building, and we've already got a first clinical trial set up, and we're actually planning to enroll into that trial at Northwell Health in the second quarter of this year. The contract is signed with the drug company, and so that's going to be an exciting test of our idea in the clinic. I want to finish where I started, which is by highlighting one of the core aspects of Cold Spring Harbor again. Of course, work like this I can't do alone. It is informed by the critical thinking of very many people, and some of them are in the room tonight. There is a whole group of us who think about these aspects in various ways, and I'm really grateful that I can have daily conversations with them. I mentioned Samir. Dave Tuvison is one of the front runners in pancreatic cancer. Mikola was just mentioned as one of your speakers at the women's event in fall. She's doing brilliant science at looking at the interface of cancer cells and general immune cells. And there are others on the slide, and others at Cold Spring Harbor whom I haven't put on the slide. And I'm excited to learn from those individuals as we build the Demerick initiative that Bruce has mentioned, which we sort of think of as a building on one hand, and I accept the great heritage of that building and accept it as a challenge. But also we think of it as a virtual institute within the institution, and Samir and I are really hopeful that we can bring together a number of teams who ask these overarching questions of how does nutrition bring about cancer, and how does abnormal nutrient processing cause cancer, and at the same time, how does cancer cause abnormal nutrient processing and thereby cause its own progression or treatment resistance. That's all I have to say. I look forward to some probing questions. Thank you very much.